Ready when you are.
Splendor, Contenders, and Roy from EastEnders. All on this week's ephemeral edition of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast that can't look aloft, with your hosts John West
and Matt Needer. On tonight's programme, Tegan gets mooned over by a horny god, while bad boy Turlo can't take his eyes off Linda Barron's rack. Meanwhile, the Fifth Doctor's in a desperate race to the finish line. Only the King's Demons to go and the season's over. We fill our empty, used-up minds with Enlightenment.
Good evening, Matt.
Hello, John. We're back. You're back. I'm back.
Yep.
You're back. That's listener/viewer.
Yes, and it very thematically coherent for our viewer.
Yeah.
That we are wearing the same clothes as last week's episode of I'll Explain Later, because of course this week
we're in the Fifth Doctor era.
Yeah,
and
pretty stinky.
Yeah, people who never change their clothes. You always raise that as this is a little inside baseball joke that we're wearing the same clothes. Yeah, we double record these episodes.
I was making more of a joke about the JNT sort of costume era. But,
well, yeah, it was the thing. What was it? It was about Adric's rubber pajamas. Which, by the end of that run.
Yeah, sort of. No, but anyway, yes, we are here to discuss Enlightenment.
We're here to discuss Enlightenment. We not only found it, we experienced it, and we're here to tell.
We certainly watched it.
We're here to tell you all about it. Yes, we're in the 80s, 1980.
1983, yes.
From the 20th
fine
anniversary
year,
season.
great vintage.
Absolutely. When did this go out, John?
So this went out from the 1st of March to the 9th of March, 1983. And it's really interesting, the people who put it together. So obviously it is the Fifth Doctor. You've got Tegan and Turlo as the companions. Mm-hmm. This was written by Barbara Clegg.
Yep.
Her only writing contribution to televised Doctor Who. I think there was a converted Big Finish thing.
Okay,
but anyway, this is her only and directed by Fiona Cumming.
Yep,
who also directed Snake Dance.
Yes,
in the same season.
Yep,
yeah. This is season 20, so only recurring villains. And here the recurring villains, I suppose, are the Guardians. The villain is the Black Guardian. Although I think the jury's out on whether the White Guardian's much cop anyway.
Well, so I mean, this is we've reached the end of the Black Guardian trilogy. So the three stories: Mordrin, Undead, Terminus, and now this, which I think we did. It's been a long. We reviewed Terminus years ago with Jim. We did Mordrin, Undead a few years back. Now here we are. So we've done them slightly out of order, but
fair to say as well, probably that. Of the three, Enlightenment has the best reputation.
Yeah, I was sort of interested. I didn't really know what the reputation was. Well, look, we made this mistake last time of getting right into talking about the story, and we forgot to do the synopsis. So, John, tell us what happens in Enlightenment.
So, following a garbled message from the White Guardian that they must not let someone win a race. The TARDIS arrives on board what appears to be and is a ship.
Yep.
A racing yacht staffed by Edwardian types. But something very odd and fishy is going on. It turns out that while they are indeed on a racing yacht of that type, it is flying through the stars in a race with other sailing vessels across history and Earth's history, it has to be said.
Yep.
And the race is being run and organised by these
Eternals.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. By the Eternals, who are sort of otherworldly, godlike immortal creatures, gods, who don't really experience anything really, and need the input of ephemerals,
or like mortals, basically. But they call them ephemerals,
and that they leech off the emotions and drive, spirit,
creativity,
of that to bring meaning to their own lives. And there is one of these Eternals is more obviously brutal than the others, and what's her name again?
Rack.
Right. As played by Linda Barron. Yes. No sniggering in the cheap seats, please. And they try to sort of survive, basically.
Yeah.
And
meanwhile, Turlo is bedeviled by the Black Guardian, who's asked him to kill the Doctor, which he's been trying to achieve for
a couple
of stories now.
So Turlo is very torn, obviously, between his cowardice and his duty, and who that duty should be to.
Yep.
I think probably the most interesting major subplot is the fact that one of the Eternals, Mariner, played by Christopher Brown, develops an affection, maybe love. It's blurry.
It's
exactly?
Quite obsessive, isn't it?
Yes, certainly an obsession. Basically, an obsession with Tegan. In probably and I think that's something we'll inevitably talk about. But that's what we're dealing with. Yeah. It's a very lofty, ambitious, and cerebral take on Doctor Who. We reviewed the Android Invasion last week, which is very much sort of Route One knockabout romp, whatever you think of its shortcomings, but it's an adventure with not much going on. To something this week we're discussing a Doctor Who story where there is far less in the way of adventure, but a huge amount of thematic stuff to get through. Fair summary?
Yeah, nailed it.
Fantastic.
Been a great episode.
So, now it's fair to say that this run of Doctor Who is not one of my favourites.
No.
As in
the listeners to our Five Doctors episode might recall.
Indeed. And in addition to which, I think there are, I have issues with the TARDIS crew and the composition of it. But you're always rather kinder to this era than I am. You liked Kinder.
True.
And I would say that this is certainly as ambitious as Kinder in terms of what it's trying to achieve intellectually.
Yep.
Do you feel that this lands?
I mean, no, not really. I mean, it's like, but that's not to say, I mean, I don't think this is very good. I found it quite a tiresome watch. And I'm sure we'll go into the reasons why, a lot of which I think are sort of institutional to the era. I think it's like the Fifth Doctor era is held, particularly by fans of a certain generation. Maybe the fans just like a shade older than us have like a lot of affection for the Peter Davison era. And I mean, part of that might just be the nostalgia of like that was when the show hooked in people when they were young. I'm not sure. And I certainly think that, it doesn't become as spectacularly unmoored from its sort of values as, it does during the Sixth Doctor era. I think the Colin Baker era is significantly worse than the Fifth Doctor era. But you can sort of see a lot of the things that generally I don't like about those Fifth and Sixth Doctor eras sort of come to pass kind of in the Fifth Doctor era. You've got Saywood's kind of obsession with the idea that, drama comes from conflict, and therefore how you represent conflict is have everybody be fucking horrible to each other all the time
with
on
a machine
screen.
gun.
Yeah, well, either violently or just have the TARDIS crew just like snap and bitch at each other all the time. It's like, this is good drama. It's like, no, it's not. It's very tiresome watch. And I think also,
I mean, it is a mistake to have Tegan and Turlough essentially dislike each other or not trust each other.
And there's not much love there with the Doctor either.
No.
I mean, it's like, and I think that's that sort of, writ large, this, I would say, I mean, this gets a lot worse during the Colin Baker era, but I find watching the Fifth Doctor stories, they're quite a cold watch. Like Davison, it's sort of interesting, even though they're sort of treated as this kind of young, spirited, nice character. He is actually quite sort of distant and dismissive.
I would agree with that.
He's very sort of aloof, and he clearly doesn't trust Turlough. The chemistry with Tegan I find sort of baffling. Like because it's just not there. I think. They just sort of snap at each other. So I find this era a very sort of cold. It's a very cold watch generally.
Yeah.
It's also, I think, an era, and particularly this season, which does a lot of retreading old villains and a lot of revisitations of sort of earlier themes and stories.
Yeah, and how is there a rich seam to mine with the Guardians?
No, I don't think there is a rich seam to mine with the Guardians, but we'll come on to that. But I think generally it's that nostalgia on the one hand, but also just, I think, quite a limited view of what Doctor Who should just do Doctor Who-y type things. It's like the 5th and 6th Doctor eras, certainly the second half of the 5th Doctor's era. I sort of think the sort of more stuff where you feel the hand of Christopher Bidmead a little more, at least, there are ideas there. I'm not sure if they're particularly interesting ones, but they're there. It's shot through with some sort of thought, but it just becomes about Doctor Who procedurals, but done in this sort of cold way. Resource wise, it starts to look pretty crap. I think it's like there's not much for me to sort of hang my hat on. What I would say about this is that I was sort of surprised by the fact that there were a lot of ideas going on in here, and I liked the fact that, pretty much unlike a lot of other 5th and 6th Doctor stories, like there's this whole sort of class dynamic, which is absolutely sort of shot through it. So it is based on this idea that the Eternals, these gods, are essentially to do whatever they want to do, they have to have this parasitic relationship with the lower mortals. They feed off them, use them up in order to essentially just further their decadent existences. They're just involved in this sort of destructive game with each other, which kind of comes through with the race. But in order to do that, there's a phenomenal amount of collateral in terms of, what they do. And, I think particularly in an era now where we're thinking a lot about, basically the extent to which the billionaire class, sort of fucked everything up for shits and giggles. This kind of plays quite well now, I think.
Yes.
Certainly the ideas of it play quite well. I also think it's like, and I know season 19 did a bit more of this, season 8 and season 18, the last Tom Baker series, but yeah, it's definitely striving for something at the poetic, just at least in the tone of the thing. It has a striking visual at the heart of it, these kind of yachts going through space, and that's absolutely the kind of thing that you could absolutely see Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat kind of using as like a central image for one of their episodes. So has quite a striking image at the heart of it, and it's like there's some interesting stuff going on there, and I think there's a lot more interesting stuff going on than there is kind of elsewhere certainly in season 20 and in the years that would follow. But there's just something about the charmless execution of it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and we talked about the android invasion last week, and we said that's a very this is almost like the opposite of the android invasion, right? The android invasion is like a very underpowered story, with, a gaping lack of ideas at the heart of it. But as a sort of pleasant watch, you can run on the fumes of it because, there's enough stuff that you have affection for and certain competence in terms of
if you are ill in bed, you got a box of Kleenex tissues next to you and Lemsip wafting through the air. You could stick that on.
You could do far worse than the Android Invasion.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Whereas this is just like, there is interesting meat on the bones, and I'm sure we'll get into it. I also think it's sort of, there's a huge sort of dose of like Clash of the Titans in this, which came out in 1981. Sort of that idea of, that the gods fucking with the humans, basically, which is, so I wouldn't be surprised if that was an influence. And again, it's sort of slightly rare in the 80s, I think, or at least this part of the 80s, to detect external influences. I think the JNT thing is very much like Doctor Who does Doctor Who things, rather than, we could pastiche this film or rip this idea from here or do anything like that. I'll come on to some of its other sort of preoccupations, which I find sort of interesting. So there's beats. I made a lot of notes on this, and I kind of think, sort of admire. there's a reasonable amount to admire, but it's so cold and charmless and sloppy, and it just drifts along sort of almost interminably at times. Anyway, I've spoken enough. Go on. Hit me. I found this a fascinating watch. I don't think it works. No.
But there were bits of it that I really liked. Particularly some performances.
Yeah.
I would like to say I think Keith Barron's performance as Captain Stryker.
He's great.
I think he's fantastic.
Yeah.
The sort of phased out of reality, emotionless, and yet there are those little flashes, like where, and obviously that's in the script, that's there in what Barbara Clegg has written. But there's where they talk about the prize, the winner of this race will achieve enlightenment, and with that they can do whatever they wish. And he snaps back, and don't ask me what it is, I won't tell you. And it's not explored anymore. I liked that enigmatic aspect to it, that it wasn't spelled out for you.
Yeah.
I thought Keith Barron managed to play distant, ethereal, decadent god surprisingly well, given that that's not something you're going to be asked to do on a day in, day out basis. So I thought his performance was really good. I also do really think that, as you said, I mean, I won't go through it all because you said it brilliantly, but
thank you.
You're welcome. But I think it plays this decadent, super rich class.
Yeah.
The class dynamic plays particularly well in an era of polycrisis where it feels like a number of billionaires are able to sort of pull certain strings and, as you said, rather winningly, for shits and giggles, that have major impact on people's lives. So I think that...
And I like the fact that theme is allowed to punch through as well. It's not just like you have to squint at it for ages and then think, maybe you could read that. It's like that comes across.
And it comes across particularly
in
because
a very apolitical era.
Yes, of the show, yes.
Yeah.
And I think it comes across particularly because of the time that the Doctor spends in the lower decks with the crew. The
Fifth Doctor always more interesting interacting with anyone else other than the TARDIS crew.
Yeah, exactly. And it's quite interesting the fact that they're essentially having to drug them in order to get them to do the job of working the rigging and not be freaked out by the fact that they're in space, which feels pretty Marxist, I suppose. That feels quite out there. There's a lot that you can focus on as ambitious, and then there's so much of it that just falls apart on the first contact with this crew, with this team making the show.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Captain Rack as soon as Captain Rack arrives, the show becomes a pantomime. And it is extremely discordant with what has happened before, where you've got this, I think episode 1 is very strong in creating an unsettling mystery. Like, where are they? Why are they there? What is going on in terms of this?
To build towards a cliffhanger that is like very good.
Yeah.
And it's a reveal cliffhanger as well.
Yeah.
The moment of suspense is actually something being revealed rather than a bit of peril for how you resolve it next week.
But then
it's a good cliffhanger though.
But as soon as Linda Barron turns up, sort of pantomime villain-esque, no criticism of her, because that's very much what's on the page, right? But as soon as she arrives, I feel like all of the oxygen just goes out of any of the big thematic stuff that they're dealing with. And this strange, airless, dreamlike world that they've created on the first ship.
Yeah.
You just, any suspension of disbelief. I mean, obviously, dramatically, that needs to go somewhere, so it can't stay at that level the whole time. But as soon as it just becomes pantomime pirates, it's just too big a leap, and you're kind of thrown out of it, basically. I want to talk a little bit more about Mariner's relationship with Tegan.
Yeah.
Because it's fascinating. And I think I'm going to get this wrong. I'm going to look up so Christopher Brown, I think, does a fantastic job playing Mariner. Deeply creepy.
Really unsettling, especially in those first scenes. Again, in episode 1, where it's like, first of all, he appears on the TARDIS screen, doesn't he? And then he's just popping up around the place to sort of basically completely unsettle Tegan.
With his perfect hair and his overly cheesy smile and his obsequiousness, this sort of oily desire to please. It's unsettling, even as they're not any of them actually being directly threatening. I mean, Turlough even says, well, they haven't threatened us, or but there's something deeply, profoundly unsettling. I think at one point Tegan says, they may not have threatened us, but there's something feels evil. And I feel that is quite effectively conveyed, and Mariner's character and the portrayal is quite powerful in landing that deep sense of it being very unsettling. But as I say, it just doesn't go anywhere really, and it falls apart when you move to Linda Barron, the space pirates, the pantomime aspect of it, including the big dangerous room with like sort of vacuum thing, do not enter, sort of bit of health and safety sort of weirdness going on, and I just feel that it affects a loftiness that isn't actually matched by a clear through line of what it wants to say.
I mean, that's exactly what I was saying. I mean, it aspires. It's writing checks that it can't cash. Basically, it aspires to this level of sort of profundity, and I think it goes a long way with setting up a world where sort of something needs to happen, and it doesn't. And it's like, and it does just sort of hold you in that situation for an hour and a half. By part 3, I'd completely forgotten actually what was at stake or who anyone's relationship to anything was. It's just sort of cycling round this.
But also they made an effort to cast, and the script characterizes, and therefore they are cast, a whole crew of working class characters who by episodes 3 and 4 just don't exist.
No, they're completely forgotten about. And, as we mentioned in the intro, Roy from EastEnders, Tony Caunter, playing, I can't remember the name of the character.
But
he's great.
The seaman who has taken the pledge, the non-drinking pledge, temperance pledge.
He's great.
He's very, very good in it.
Yeah.
And then just disappears. And the script ascribes the working class characters no agency, which we thought was the thing that we were critiquing the Eternals for.
Yeah.
We're sort of saying, the Eternals don't respect the agency of the working class characters that they've abducted, basically.
And what's the payoff? You know, they're not liberated at the
well,
end.
No, or whatever.
Or we don't even know what happens to them.
No, but like that's the thing. The script also affords them no agency.
Yeah.
So and I'm
given the amount of time it spends in episode 1 to set them up, as well.
It just seems it's just a bizarre dramatic choice to sort of just go, well, we're done with them.
Yeah. We've got Linda Barron now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Pantomiming around, sort of incongruously. I mean, Elizabeth Sandifer wrote a very interesting essay about this story, focusing far less on the kind of the obvious sort of thematic meat around the decadence of the Eternal Society, and focusing much more on Turlough's dilemma.
Yes.
And sort of, I think, quite convincingly framing that as Turlough grappling with his sexuality and effectively coming out at the end, right? So to be clear, obviously, effectively the Doctor manages to engineer a situation where he wins the race and with Turlough, and Turlough is gifted a portion of the Enlightenment on offer, represented by a sort of glowing lump of acrylic, which is meant to be a diamond or whatever. Whatever. It's a MacGuffin, so it doesn't matter, like a shiny thing. And essentially, the choice he has is to either give that to the Black Guardian in payment to sort of pay off his debt that he'd made this contract to kill the Doctor, or to give the Black Guardian the Doctor and keep the crystal for himself. And grappling with who he really is and the direction he wants his life to go in, he obviously chucks the crystal at the Black Guardian, who sort of spontaneously combusts and disappears and all the rest of it. And I'm not claiming the authorship of this idea. This is very much Sandifer, but she's sort of saying, and it's absolutely true on screen as well, that the Doctor gives every impression that he knew about what Turlough's real motivation was through the trilogy
that's
up to
interesting
now.
that there isn't a moment where, like, even though it's never articulated, it's like the Doctor isn't surprised.
No. To the extent that, and Sandifer's point is basically, we knew, hun. Yeah. Basically, we knew, and like Tegan's like, we knew. So,
and then they never speak about it again.
And so she posits that sort of that choice as him deciding to come out rather than remain in the closet. And I think obviously John Nathan Turner was gay, and there's a lot in this that, I mean, again, Sandifer says, Linda Barron's character is basically a drag queen who happens to be played by a woman, right? There's a lot of gay culture that comes through on screen in this era.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it's reaching to see Turlough's torment through the prism of a time when it was a lot more difficult to come out than now. Yeah. So I think that's an interesting,
it's a super interesting read.
It's an interesting, it's a fascinating read. I'm largely convinced by it. I don't think that saves this from being a very uneven piece of television.
I think also it's like, I mean,
and of course they don't then later do anything with it.
Well, no, but also, I mean, I think,
and you can't rule out that it was basically an accident.
Well, no, you can't. And I think part of the problem that I have, and I think this is the case for all three Black Guardian stories, is that it's not quite like the Key to Time, where the Key to Time is just like, it's a reason to turn up in this location, right? There are definite points, like basically the Black Guardian story is so unintegrated with the stories that also surround it. Or sort of within the stories in which it appears, but it doesn't not impinge on the narrative sometimes. So it's like, it's not just like a sort of bit of a background arc that will pay off one day, like a sort of Bad Wolf reference or something like that, because clearly there's things like, I mean, it's quite striking that the cliffhanger to episode 2 is one of the companions attempting suicide. I mean, Turlo like fully intends to kill himself at that point, which is, you know, I don't think we've seen that anywhere else in the series.
No.
You know, so it does bleed into the story, but at the same time, it's so sort of, it doesn't add anything to it, and at certain times I think it muddies the waters. So the thing that I think we both agree is most compelling about Enlightenment is this idea of like the decadent god class, but it's also complicated by the fact that then you've got these two other fucking gods who are clearly, like, from the way it's sort of made out, of a tier above the Eternals in terms of like, I mean, it's never really clear what the Guardians are, but whatever they are, I don't think they are anything metaphorically or dramatically. This is the problem.
Yin and yang of the yin and yang of the universe, right?
But it's such a hack idea that it's like, in terms of, okay, well, what is?
Oh yeah,
this?
Of course it is.
And
I'm not defending it.
No. I agree. That's what they are. They're the balance of whatever. But in terms of their sort of deal making or how they interact with each other, I don't really know. But in a universe where like there are gods in this universe. And here it's saying like these gods are one specific thing. To have some other gods who are a different thing and they represent, and it's really, I would actually be interested to, not in any particular rush to rewatch this, but I would be interested to have a proper read of the Sandifer essay and then go back and watch the story with that in mind. Because
I'm not watching it again.
I can't, I don't understand that final scene with the Turlo making his choice, because it's like, and I keep going through it. It's like, and the guard, what is it? The White Guardian.
The Enlightenment is the choice, or
yeah. Enlightenment was the choice, and yet I don't know. Maybe I'm dumb or something, but it's just like I don't understand what it's doing.
I can vouch for that.
I don't understand what it's doing or what it's trying to say, and I think even if it is trying to do or say something, it's working so against this other set of gods where they're trying to say something else elsewhere in the story.
Well, I suppose Enlightenment is in that sense is meant to be that the distillation of your worldview and your morality and what you've learned from the people around you and the choice to do the right thing. To take all of that into account and to do the right thing, that in itself
but for that to be the denouement of a story that is clearly about something else is like is sort of profoundly unsatisfying. And the fact that it doesn't even integrate its imagery. It's like crystals play a big part in this. This is one of the things I sort of noted, that it's playing on a lot of quite 70s new agey concerns. That you've got sort of crystals. You know, the idea of enlightenment obviously is that, you know, that term is a Buddhist term, although it's not really being used in any particular sort of Buddhist context here. You almost weirdly...
Well, it's not exclusively a Buddhist term.
No, it's not.
There is La Lumière, like, you know, the period of the Enlightenment, the growth of scientific and cultural understanding alongside and separate to religion in the 17th and particularly 18th centuries. I think, you know, when I think of Enlightenment, I think primarily of that... with a kind of,
well, for many reasons, this is the difference between you and me.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, I guess my point is that it's sort of, I think it's definitely drawing on a few sort of, there's a new agey sort of streak to this. I think in terms of its sort of crystal imagery and, you know, and I think bandying around that term sort of enlightenment. But it's sort of, you know, we've also seen 3 episodes where Turlo is yomping around a piece of crystal, which is what 3 stories, which he uses to communicate with the Black Guardian.
Yes.
And yet that plays no part either in this story or even in the denouement, because Turlo destroys the Black Guardian by hurling a completely different piece of crystal at it.
And then his crystal turns back.
It's like, it doesn't...
Well, I think, you know, so from what I have...
The Black Guardian story, it doesn't... But work.
from what I've and I think we have Eric Sayward to thank for that, because it would seem that
it's a completely contradictory imposition on this story.
Barbara Clegg submitted a story, and from what I understand, Eric Sayward said, "Oh goody, this will fit nicely into my Guardians arc," and so that was all bolted on, right? That's like a cut and shut car made from sort of two bangers, it's sort of like welded together on the cheap. So it's not surprising that it doesn't dramatically work, because that wasn't really the intention of the author.
But it's so, I suppose the clumsiness of it is that it is still pulling on some of the same imagery. So all it does is confuse the story. It's not like, I mean, even if you think like, an arc that I didn't particularly like, but like the Madame Kavarian stuff in season 6, the second Matt Smith series, where like, that Amy keeps seeing that window open and Frances Barber sticks her head out like in different places. And the point is that's
terrifying.
That's like a jarring, that's like a jarring element that sort of, is clearly designed to sort of jolt you out the moment, remind you of the arc, and then you're sort of back into the story. I don't think it particularly works, but it is at least designed to be a completely different bit of imagery. But the fact that you also have like gods and crystals and things in a story that is about a completely different set of gods and crystals, it's like the Black Guardian story, like it spoils the rest of the story, I think.
It certainly taints it. Quite apart from anything else, of course. The old hams that they've got playing the Guardians. I mean, this is not an original point, but
bloody hell,
both Cyril Luckham as the White Guardian and Valentine Dial as the Black Guardian. I mean, particularly Valentine Dial is just, it's just shocking. I mean, the performances. I mean, I know that we occasionally.
He does have a great voice. I'm sure he had a great voiceover career at some point.
No, but that's not the point. The point is, I mean, he plays
the acting is terrible.
I mean, I know we say pantomime villain a lot, but like literally, like. It's literally pantomime villain, and all that sort of stuff. It's just it's a baffling artistic choice.
Yeah, but then this is also there's something, and again, I think and I think episode 1 does well to conjure a degree of atmosphere.
I agree. I think episode 1 is pretty strong,
but there's even just the sheer, almost just like ineptitude of so. When they're in the TARDIS and they have that vision of the White Guardian who's trying to get a message through, but you can't hear it.
Yeah.
And it's sort of meant to be like, the signal's phasing in and out and we can't hear you. But actually, it's just all done verbally by the actor. So the bit where he says, what's the phrase he says? He says, the winner takes all. Yeah. But it's the guy saying it 3 times rather than acting it or something. It's fucking terrible.
Mm-mm. What do we? I mean, is there anything to be said about the direction by Fiona Cumming? I mean, it's a tough gig because there's no location work; it's all sets.
No,
so
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. Do you know what? I mean, it's like it conveys a certain claustrophobia.
Yeah, I think that
which I think something like, and towards as the story drags on becomes somewhat stifling. But I think, for a very enclosed bottle episode, it does fine. I do think it's quite a neat touch to do all of the sort of exterior model work stuff, which is clearly being done on a sound stage or like, certainly in some space where they can stick Mark Strickland on a wire and swing him around, which I think he did actually injure himself during the during that. The fact that all of that shot on 16mm film to make it look a bit grainier and sort of, that's not shot on video, I think works quite well. But I don't know. But then, you say the direction. I mean, okay, so the framing and realization, fine. But the notes being given to actors, I mean, that opening TARDIS scene where the Doctor's trying to do some repairs on the TARDIS. Turlough's playing chess, and then the Guardian appears. And it's like walking through treacle, that, because not only is it just like an interminable 80s TARDIS scene, which I will note looks a bit better than the normal ones because the lights are turned down really low. I quite like the low light TARDIS versus the sort of dazzling bright
that's
white
quite
TARDIS
good,
of the
actually.
80s. But it's like all 3 actors, it's not even that they're not, that the characters don't work. They all feel like they're giving performances in something completely different.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to talk about how much we
that opening scene is borderline unwatchable.
Yes, it is bad. And like we've said many times before, it often feels like anything good happens despite the TARDIS crew, certainly not because of it.
Yeah. It's just stupid shit that doesn't make sense. Like when Tegan and Mariner are out on the deck, and Tegan asks Mariner, "Where's the Doctor?" And Mariner says, "In the wheelhouse." And Tegan says, "I must go to him," and then sits down and has a strop.
Yeah.
Rather than just go to the fucking wheelhouse. It's like it doesn't. Yeah. It's really bad.
There just isn't an eye across this stuff.
Just like A does not follow B. It's like it's not.
Well, no, B does not.
Sorry,
follow. A does follow B.
A does
and
follow.
That's the
yeah,
problem.
That's the problem. There you go. I've had my brain addled by watching Enlightenment.
Yes, you've become actively de-enlightened. But I did find, you know what? Despite everything we said, I found bits of it winningly weird.
Yeah.
And that weirdness, that oddness, I mean, this is strange television.
Yeah. It's really strange.
It's really strange. And I can only...
And not immediately embarrassingly strange.
No.
You don't get that cringe when your wife walks in.
No, it's not like Twin Dilemma bad or or even sort of cartoonish, not making any comment about good or bad, but not even cartoonish like Happiness Patrol, for example. Which has a very kind of graphic novel kind of aesthetic to it. This is strange in its own kind of dreamlike way, and I found myself more interested in the bits of it that sort of worked, particularly I have to say in episode 1.
Yeah.
Than I perhaps thought I would be, sort of reading snippets about what this story was likely to be.
Yeah.
And so I suppose I applaud that ambition, but progressively as the serial works through its episodes, it just gets worse and worse and worse.
The air comes out of it.
And as I say, by the time you get the space pirate, who's the chap from Imagination who pops up?
So when
I was trying to look for this just now.
Yeah, Lee John from Imagination.
Lee with
3 E's.
With 3 E's.
So Imagination's biggest hit was a year earlier. So I would like to sort of put an addendum into when we were talking about guest turns in Doctor Who.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, exactly.
A few episodes back.
Yeah.
Like this was actually a pop star, not an actor, doing a cameo turn in the story at the time, and he had no acting experience. Apparently, the regular actor dropped out, and he was like, "Yeah, he's terrible.
You can tell
he's absolutely terrible.
He's appalling."
But it's quite fun to see him there. You know, it's like, and I'd definitely. Okay, yeah, that is a legit 80s celebrity turn rather than someone from a light entertainment era.
So apparently Peter Sallis was originally cast as, is it Stryker?
In the Keith Barron role?
Yeah.
Wow.
But had to pull out due to eventually the filming schedule.
Let me guess, was he on Last of the Summer Wine?
Yeah. Which is as equally slow-paced and ethereal.
Peter Sallis is in... He's in a Troughton story, I think. I can't remember, is it The Seeds of Death or something? It's one that we haven't encountered yet, I think.
But he, of course, he did eventually get into space.
He did.
As Wallace.
Patricia, what do you have?
7.
7. And Katie?
7.
7. Let's have yours, Patricia.
Spanked.
Spanked, yep.
I've got spanked as well.
Spanked, right.
So you have.
What's going on here, girls?
Well, you've got a nice one. Bedpans.
Okay, what's the score?
So I just wanted to broaden this out a little bit and think a little more about gods, because we've talked about the Eternals. Who, yeah. Put the cat amongst
and you've left
pigeons.
10 minutes for this.
Yeah. Gods, I think, aren't traditionally something that we really sort of think about in terms of Doctor Who, and I think maybe this will sort of cross over a little bit into the discussion we had about science and magic and the sort of blurring of the two. That we talked about with the daemons. But yeah, it's sort of we've got two sets of gods here, and thinking about it, although you don't you don't think of Doctor Who as having a universe of gods. You know, the classic series has found a few over the years. I mean, the Eternals, obviously, the gods of the Black and White Guardians, you know, are effectively gods in the sort of Greek style. The gods of Ragnarok in the Great Show in the Galaxy, which, you know, we haven't got to yet. Sutekh, obviously, in the classic series, and then you know, in the first Shooty Gatwa series, and then obviously it's something that Russell T Davies very consciously leaned into with his sort of first rebooted series, or with the 2024 series, giving us obviously the return of the toy maker, and then sort of establishing as part of a pantheon with the Maestro in the Devil's Cord, and then, you know, Sutekh is returning as the big bad of all of them. Did gods work in Doctor Who?
Well, and of course the Time Lords themselves are sort of demigods, aren't they?
Well, it's interesting. They're presented that to start with, and then, you know, there's every sort of layer at the time. So when the Time Lords appear at the end of the War Games, which obviously, you know, got buffed up and re-released over Christmas, so might be fresh in quite a few listeners' and viewers' minds. The War Games very much presents them as these sort of godlike creatures or godlike beings, and then every time we see them since, you know, it's to basically reduce them to this sort of decadent, not bureaucracy, but it's sort of like it's a fading aristocratic society, essentially. And then even sort of down to the Chibnall level of basically saying that they were almost just sort of parasitic about, you know, all of the sort of godlike stuff came from whatever creature the Doctor was from a different universe, and the Time Lords nicked it all. So I don't
rather suggesting that the Doctor didn't need that extra burst of regeneration energy from Matt Smith to Capaldi. But sorry. Anyway, sorry. We're not going there.
Yes, and why does the Jo Martin's Doctor? Why does her TARDIS look like a police box? Anyway, it is something that Doctor Who has come back to surprisingly often for something that doesn't feel particularly, you know, within the universe of Doctor Who as we generally think about it, being like sort of just aliens and planets and stuff. Do you like the idea?
Yeah, I think it is always useful to have a flex of you know, a layer of power or creatures above that of our hero, right? And if you think of the Doctor as, because obviously an actor only wants to do it for a certain amount of time, they get recast, therefore you have regeneration, therefore you basically you immediately have put the Doctor, the Time Lords, into that class of sort of demigods. It sort of necessitates that the baddies have that you occasionally would have baddies with powers vastly superior, because the odds need to be not in the Doctor's favour, otherwise it's a very dull watch, right? Not wanting to go all Eric Saywood and say you need lots of conflict in every fucking element, but if the Doctor is obviously the smartest person, I mean, this is something that Stephen Moffat kind of grapples with in Sherlock. I mean, to wildly diminishing returns and not, but like, what do you do if Sherlock Holmes is obviously the very smartest person alive, can just walk into a room and figure everything out? Is that actually dramatically interesting? Right? So what do you do with it? And he goes off in kind of meta postmodern tangents and tries to find interest, as I say, to diminishing returns. But that's what he. And I think similarly, without having that flex of powers that are significantly bigger or larger, you kind of run aground. The other thing I think as well is that, you know, Doctor Who at its best manages to be a fun adventure romp for the kids, and somehow still deal with stuff, right? You know, real themes and so on. And religion is a huge component of human culture. And so it would be somewhat...
And you're rarely going to address that head on in terms of like... I mean, it was interesting, like an early idea from, I think it was John Wiles, who was Verity Lambert's successor briefly, was that I think there was an outline of like Doctor Who meets God being something that was sort of bandied around at least at some point. But yes, you're right. It's not going to get into the reeds of like actual sort of faith-based,
Well,
the Doctor discovers which religion is the true one.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to do it on a sort of at least vaguely allegorical level.
Well, this comes back to what we were saying about the Zygon invasion/inversion, where sometimes if an allegory is too on the nose, it manages to not really say anything or be clumsy or whatever. And so it's better to sort of sketch these things out impressionistically. And I think that's what the kind of the discussion of gods kind of does whenever it comes up in Doctor Who. It sort of touches on that territory without it being, this is about Christianity, so I think there's that. I thought, funnily enough, Enlightenment and Wild Blue Yonder, the middle of the 60th anniversary specials, were oddly companion pieces.
That's interesting.
In the sense that you've got you're trapped on a ship with these gods who have outsized power almost beyond your comprehension, and outside of the normal rules or boundaries of what you deal with on a day-to-day basis. And Wild Blue Yonder sticks with that singular idea.
Yeah.
And achieves an astonishing amount. I mean, we haven't reviewed it, but I thought Wild Blue Yonder was fantastic. And
it's the best episode of Doctor Who in the last few years.
Yes, I agree. Whereas, of course, Enlightenment, we've just spent a lengthy amount of time sort of picking that apart and sort of saying how lumpy at best that is. But I think that coming back to our conversation about science and magic, for me, it's not dogmatically about saying Doctor Who shouldn't go there, or should be this, or shouldn't be that, or it's sci-fi. So this is does the writing dramatically earn the right to go into that territory?
Yeah.
Does it work as a story? Do the motivations of the characters land? Does it make sense? Are you taken on a logical journey, the internal logic of the story? And I think if you are, then you can do anything.
Well, this is the thing. I think it's like, I basically agree. I think you're right that it comes down to, it's like, okay, if you're going to do this stuff,
do it well.
Yeah, do it well. Yeah. What a critical insight that is. Fucking hell.
More of the same next week, folks.
But I think there was something like, Davis, I think, taught quite a big game around, the new pantheon of gods that was, obviously a big thing throughout the first Shooting Atwa series. And I think made the same argument you did of like, basically, to put the Doctor on the back foot, you need to have villains that can do anything, or at least can operate on a higher plane.
Yeah.
I actually think in terms of the execution of it, and we'll obviously come into the episodes a bit in a lot more detail, but I think it was used more just for sort of narrative compression of having a bunch of crazy shit happen, rather than it leaning into anything particularly interesting.
Thematic. Yeah, no, I think that's broadly
particularly
right.
Given how rapidly, we'll talk about it in due course. I think I liked the Devil's Cord a little more than you did, but I think a lot of very easy blink and you'll miss it resolutions. I mean, like with the whole Sutek arc at the end of the series anyway, it's like you're sort of bigging it up to say, and this time this is the biggest challenge they've ever faced, which actually then makes the sort of push button resolution of it all even more disappointing, because it's like, it's disappointing when you defeat the Daleks in that, with that level of sort of narrative contrivance, but when you have actually bigged up, oh my god, it's God.
Yeah, but I think I actually, so I would agree with you that the plot dynamics of how you resolve these things are very challenging, because ultimately, if a god is all powerful,
the
resolution is going to be some magic. So, and we had this discussion.
I think that's the issue that I have, and it's almost like, I mean, we've talked about this with I can't remember if we talked about this on mic about the giggle, and again, it's like not to preempt what we might think about it in whenever we get around to looking at it, but yeah, I mean that's very quickly resolved because he's doing a flex of like, yeah, and then the toy maker went away, but look, is the new guy.
Yeah,
it's like this is more interesting.
Yeah,
and he's right, it is more interesting, but it's like, yeah, it's the sort of if you're going to go to the God thing, like how do you defeat them?
Yeah. I think what you have to do,
I mean, the case of Enlightenment, what do? Get them to fall through that weird hole in the eye room with the eye in the floor?
Yeah, but it's
not even really clear how he does kill Linda.
He just pushes it. I mean,
pushes her out into space.
It's that Turlo aligns with the Doctor, so there are two of them to push them into the thing.
I see.
Rather than Turlo teaming up with Linda Barron to push the Doctor through.
Yes.
Which also, by the way, undercuts the tension of the choice he later makes with the Black Guardian.
Yeah.
Because he's already chosen to.
So they probably had the chat on the way over there.
Yeah, well, that's it. The thing is, like, you've basically got two different conclusions where, oh no, Turlo helped the Doctor rather than shoving him.
They'd already done that.
He'd already done that, so it probably wasn't. It's not the tension is somewhat undercut.
It's a point deducted for Enlightenment in the final minutes of this.
I know, I'm afraid you lose 10 points. Yeah. But yeah, I think that what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Basically, yeah, if once you have a god who can do anything, like, and this is what happens with Neil Patrick Harris's Toymaker in The Giggle, he can do anything, literally anything, turn people into bouncy balls and all the rest of it. It's not going to be
puts a lot of pressure on your resolution to deliver something extraordinary.
But the resolution can only be, I've got bigger magic than you.
Yeah.
Boom. Right? What else? I think what you have to do, and this is not something I'm an expert in by any stretch, but add to the long list of things that I'm not a massive expert in. But, I think that you have to build fallibilities into the god. I mean, if you look at the Greek and Roman god myths, the gods always have
watch Clash of the Titans.
Yeah, all right. But the gods always have some ridiculous weakness, and so this god can do anything, but on the third Wednesday of the month, if he's in a McDonald's, you can just So then the plot becomes, how do you get him into a McDonald's? I'm being ridiculous. But the point is that you have to be upfront, I think, about the weakness. And then the interesting plot work can be around how do you engineer that situation.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's like, I think I agree with you that it's potentially fruitful territory for a show like Doctor Who to go to. But I think it requires writing to really deliver it, and I think there are a fair few examples of actually, it's been deployed to the opposite effect. It's kind of just like sloppy magic, basically, that only can then be defeated by even bigger magic.
Sloppy magic and bigger magic. It's getting hot in here.
Those are nicknames. Anyway, but these are just some thoughts that we've had. What do you think? What do you think, viewers and listeners? Tell us what you think about gods in Doctor Who. And indeed, if there's any that I missed on my sort of top of the dome kind of list of the
Barry
various
Letts.
gods. Very good.
The Big Daddy.
If you want to get in touch about that or any of the other issues that we flagged tonight, you can through the usual channels. Email hello@I'llExplainLater.com. Blue Sky, we're on there. Twitter, X. Oh, fucking hell, when we delete that account, it'll eventually have basically all the people that we talk to on X.com moved over to Blue Sky now.
Yeah, I think we're in a process of running down. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Running down.
All right, do you know what? Account. Don't get it. Unless you have literally no other means, and you refuse to type an email, don't bother getting in touch with us via X.
No, I'm not really checking it much.
The everything app. But I do use Instagram, so check us there @ExplainLaterPod. leave us a comment below. Leave us a review. Leave us a rating. Wherever you're getting this, it'll give you some little button that you can click to say,
Fucking carrier pigeon, whatever. We're needy people.
Come round. Rap on the window that's behind here.
Yeah, bring us some tins of Stella. Like we're needy people.
Yeah.
We're not doing this. We're not doing this for nothing, right? We're doing this to garner the love that's out there. You know, we know there's a lot of love out there for Doctor Who.
Send some,
and we're hoping to have some
slice of that action.
Yeah, exactly. In the same way that, you know, Mark Strickson gets a little corner slice of Enlightenment.
Yeah.
We want a little corner slice of the love that's out there for Doctor Who. We want to just carve a little bit of that out for us. So, you know, make our day.
I think anyone who's on the fence about doing it is now firmly in the know. I'm not emailing these weirdos.
Yeah, and obviously,
not emailing these.
Obviously, send your vital statistics, your mobile phone number,
yes. National insurance number.
Yep.
Anyway, we'll be back next week to talk more Doctor Who.
Yep.
Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching.
Yes.
Have a lovely week.
Take care.
Bye.